Sunday morning. The casserole was still warm. I remember that detail with a clarity that borders on the obsessive, because it was the first thing I noticed when I walked back into the kitchen after answering the phone. Steam was still rising from the ceramic dish my wife had pulled from the oven 20 minutes earlier. The condensation had formed delicate droplets on the inside of the glass lid, each one catching the morning light that streamed through our kitchen windows. Beef bourguignon, my favorite dish. The one Victoria had been making with increasing frequency over the past 6 months, always insisting I eat 2 generous helpings, always watching me take that first bite with a smile that I now understand was something else entirely. It was a smile of anticipation, a smile of quiet, murderous patience, a smile that said she was watching an investment mature. But on that Sunday morning in late October, I didn't eat it. Because Raymond Torres, my attorney of 22 years, the man who'd handled everything from my first business incorporation to my prenuptial agreement, to the trust funds I'd established for my children, had called me on a Sunday. Raymond doesn't call on Sundays. In 2 decades of professional relationship and genuine friendship, he'd never once called me on a weekend. Not when my first wife was dying of pancreatic cancer and we needed to expedite the medical directives. Not when I was negotiating the largest contract of my career and needed last-minute legal review. Not when my daughter was in a car accident during her sophomore year of college and I was frantically trying to understand liability issues. Never. Not once. Not ever. He certainly didn't call to chat about the Broncos game. "Marcus," he said, and his voice was wrong, flat, controlled, deliberately measured in a way that immediately set every nerve in my body on edge. It was the voice you use when you're trying not to scare someone who should be absolutely terrified. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say, and I need you not to react. Do not change your expression. Do not raise your voice. Above all, do not hang up this phone until I have finished speaking. Do you understand me? Victoria was in the shower upstairs. I could hear the water running through the ceiling, a low, comforting hum that suddenly sounded like static, like interference, like the white noise of a life about to be dismantled. "Raymond, what's going on?" I kept my voice steady, but my hand tightened around the phone. "Don't eat the food your wife cooked. Whatever she made today, don't eat it. Don't let your children eat it if they're visiting. Don't even taste it to check the seasoning. I need you to pack it into containers. All of it. Every bite. Every drop of sauce. And bring it to the address I'm about to text you. It's a private laboratory. They specialize in forensic toxicology. They're expecting you. Do it today, Marcus. Do it immediately. Do it before Victoria comes downstairs and asks you where you're going and why you're carrying her Sunday dinner out the front door in Tupperware containers." I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at that casserole. The burgundy sauce gleaming under the pendant lights. The pearl onions arranged in a pattern that suggested care. The careful arrangement of beef chunks that my wife had positioned just so, because Victoria believed that presentation mattered, that food should be beautiful as well as nourishing. "Raymond," I said slowly, forcing the air past my suddenly dry throat. "What precisely are we talking about here? Is this some kind of elaborate practical joke? Because if Derek put you up to this—" "I wish it were a joke, Marcus. God, I wish it were." He paused, and I heard him take a shaky breath. In 22 years, I had never heard Raymond Torres sound shaky. He was the most composed man I knew. "I can't explain everything over the phone. Not now. The situation is too sensitive, and frankly, I don't know who might be listening or what surveillance might be in place. But I've been looking into something for the past 3 weeks, an irregularity that flagged in my system during a routine review of your estate documents. And what I found: another pause, another breath. Marcus, I need you to trust me. I've known you since you were 25 years old. I was at your first wedding. I held Sarah's hand in the hospital the night she died. I helped you write trusts that would protect your children, no matter what happened to you. I was a groomsman at your second wedding. Even though I had reservations, I should have voiced more strongly. Have I ever steered you wrong? No, I admitted. You haven't. Then do what I'm telling you. Take the food, all of it. Don't eat any of it. Go to the lab. Ask for Dr. Patricia Okonkwo. She's expecting you today, even though it's Sunday, because I called in a favor that cost me dearly. After you drop off the samples, come directly to my office. I'll be there by 3 o'clock. We need to talk about what I've discovered. And we need to do it face to face, behind closed doors, before Victoria finishes her shower and comes down those stairs and looks at you with those green eyes and asks where you're going and why you look so pale. I heard the water shut off upstairs. The sudden silence was deafening. I have to go, I said. Marcus, the food. Promise me. I promise. I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. My hands were trembling slightly, a fine tremor that I hadn't experienced since the day Sarah's oncologist told us there was nothing more they could do. Before I continue with what happened next, I need you to understand something fundamental about who I am and how I process the world. I'm not a paranoid person. I'm not a man who jumps to conclusions or sees enemies lurking in shadows or suspects conspiracy in coincidence. I built my architecture firm from a basement office with 2 drafting tables into a company that designs hospitals and corporate headquarters and government facilities across the Western United States. I did that by being methodical, patient, rational. I look for structural integrity in everything: buildings, contracts, relationships. I verify load-bearing calculations before I trust them to hold weight. When someone tells me something impossible, something that violates every assumption I hold about my life, my first instinct isn't to believe them. It's to gather evidence. It's to examine the foundation. It's to determine whether the structure can bear the weight of the claim being made. But Raymond's voice had something in it that superseded logic. The frantic urgency of a man watching a catastrophe unfold in slow motion and desperate to pull someone out of the wreckage before the final collapse. So I did what he said. Victoria was still in the shower. I could hear her singing softly, some melody I didn't recognize, when I found the Tupperware containers in the cabinet above the refrigerator. The containers were part of a matching set Victoria had purchased 6 months into our marriage, insisting that proper food storage was essential for a well-run household. I'd teased her about being obsessively organized. She'd kissed me and told me that organization was how she showed love. I transferred the entire casserole into 3 separate containers, working quickly but carefully. I used a silicone spatula to scrape every drop of sauce from the ceramic dish. I collected the bits of meat that clung to the edges. I was thorough in a way that felt absurd, like a crime scene technician preserving evidence rather than a husband handling leftovers. Then I went to the refrigerator. The salad Victoria had prepared was in a large glass bowl. The homemade vinaigrette dressing in a separate mason jar with a handwritten label that said Marcus's special dressing in her elegant script. She'd created the recipe specifically for me, she'd told me, adjusting the proportions of oil and vinegar to match my preferences. I took the salad. I took the dressing. I took the fresh-baked rolls cooling on a wire rack by the window, still slightly warm from the oven. I stripped the kitchen counters bare. I was walking out the front door, carrying a cardboard box full of what was supposed to be our Sunday dinner, when I heard the bathroom door open upstairs and the soft pad of Victoria's footsteps in the hallway. "Marcus?" she called down. "Honey, are you downstairs? The casserole should be ready to eat. I made it just the way you like it." I didn't answer. I didn't stop. I walked out the front door, got into my car, backed out of the driveway of the house I'd purchased 12 years ago with my first wife, and I drove away from everything I thought I knew about my life. The laboratory was in an industrial park near Denver International Airport, housed in an unmarked building that looked like 1,000 other unmarked buildings in 1,000 other industrial parks across America. Beige walls, small windows, a parking lot with faded lines. Nothing about it suggested that it was a facility specializing in the detection of compounds designed to kill people slowly and leave minimal trace. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo was waiting for me in the lobby. She was a Nigerian-American woman in her early 60s, with gray-streaked braids pulled back from a face that radiated calm intelligence. She had the kind of direct eye contact that made you feel like she could see through steel, through pretense, through the comfortable lies we tell ourselves to get through the day. "Mr. Chen," she said when I walked in carrying the box. Her voice was warm but professional, touched by an accent that reminded me of a colleague I'd worked with on a hospital project in Lagos. "Raymond told me what to test for. You should have preliminary results within 48 hours. Comprehensive analysis, including isotope tracing and concentration mapping, will take approximately 2 weeks." "What exactly are you testing for?" I asked. My voice came out as barely a whisper, and I hated how weak it sounded. Raymond wouldn't tell me. He said it was too sensitive for the phone. Dr. Okonkwo looked at me for a long moment, her dark eyes betraying nothing but a kind of professional compassion. "Heavy metals, Mr. Chen. Specifically, compounds consistent with slow, systematic poisoning. Arsenic, thallium, polonium, lead acetate. A few other substances that Raymond specifically requested I screen for based on patterns he identified in your medical records." I felt my world fragmenting, the load-bearing walls cracking. "Has someone been—" I couldn't finish the sentence. It was too absurd, too impossible, too much like something from a television crime drama rather than real life. Dr. Okonkwo's expression softened infinitesimally. "I don't know what's happening in your life, Mr. Chen. I'm a scientist. I analyze samples and report findings. I don't speculate about motives or perpetrators. What I know is that your attorney contacted me with significant urgency, asked me to run a comprehensive toxicology panel on food samples and biological specimens, and offered to pay triple my usual rate for weekend work. I suggest you have a conversation with Raymond about what prompted his concerns. I'll have your samples cataloged and testing initiated within the hour." She handed me a receipt for the delivery, a formal chain of custody document that noted the date, time, and condition of each sample. "One more thing," she said as I turned to leave. "Raymond mentioned he'd sent you some biological samples as well. Hair and nail clippings, I believe?" I stared at her blankly. "I don't—" "Check your car. He said he had someone leave them in your vehicle this morning before you woke up, in a brown envelope on the passenger seat." I walked back to my car in a daze. Sure enough, there was a brown envelope on the passenger seat that I hadn't noticed in my rush to get inside the lab. It contained a plastic bag with several strands of my hair, collected from my hairbrush, I realized, and nail clippings that must have come from the bathroom wastebasket. Raymond had been planning this intervention for days, possibly weeks. He'd been gathering evidence before he ever made that call. I drove to his office in a state that I can only describe as controlled dissociation. My hands were steady on the wheel, My breathing was regular. I obeyed traffic laws with the automatic precision of someone who'd been driving for 30 years. But my mind was somewhere else entirely, running through every meal my wife had cooked for me in the past year. Every time she'd encouraged me to finish my plate. Every morning she'd brought me coffee in bed with a smile and a kiss on the forehead. Every evening she'd insisted I take the supplements she'd special ordered from an expensive wellness company because she was so concerned about my declining energy levels. That's when the question surfaced. The question that would haunt me for the next 6 weeks, and in some ways, for the rest of my life. How long had the woman I loved been trying to kill me? My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 47 years old, and until that Sunday in late October, I thought I understood my life with reasonable clarity. I grew up in Sacramento, California, the only child of immigrants who'd come to America from Taiwan in 1972 with $300, 2 suitcases, and a dream that their children, the children they hoped to have, would never know the kind of poverty they'd escaped. My father, Wei Chen, pressed shirts at a dry cleaning business 6 days a week until his hands developed permanent calluses and his fingers could fold fabric with mechanical precision. My mother, Lynn, did alterations in the back room, transforming cheap fabric into something people could be proud to wear, making $30 dresses look like $100 dresses through sheer skill and attention to detail. They saved every penny. They sacrificed every comfort. They never took vacations, never bought new furniture, never complained about the 18-hour days or the customers who were rude or the endless physical labor that was slowly wearing down their bodies. They had a purpose that transcended their own happiness. Their son would have opportunities they never did. When I was 17 years old, 3 weeks before I was supposed to leave for UC Berkeley on a partial scholarship, my parents sat me down at our small kitchen table and handed me an envelope. Inside was $32,000 in cash, their entire life savings, everything they'd accumulated in 25 years of relentless work. For college, my father said in his accented English. For your future. You become something more than us, Marcus. You make us proud. I tried to refuse. I told them I could work part-time, take out loans, find another way. My mother took my hands in hers and looked at me with tears streaming down her face. This is why we came to America, she said. This is why we work, so you don't have to work the way we work, so you can use your mind instead of your hands. You take this money, Marcus. You go to school. You become an architect like you want. You build beautiful things. That is how you thank us. I became an architect. Not because I initially loved buildings, though I grew to love them with a passion that bordered on obsession, but because when I was 14 years old, I watched my parents' dry cleaning shop nearly get condemned due to a structural issue that a lazy building inspector had missed for years. The foundation had been slowly settling on one side, compromised by decades of water damage from a neighboring property's faulty drainage system. The walls had developed cracks that everyone assumed were cosmetic, until one morning a section of ceiling collapsed 3 feet from where my mother was working. The building inspector said the shop would have to close. The repairs would cost more than my parents could afford. Everything they'd built was about to disappear because of invisible structural failures that had been progressing for years while everyone went about their daily business, oblivious to the catastrophe forming beneath their feet. A young architect from a local firm, a man named David Moreno, who'd heard about our situation from a mutual acquaintance, volunteered to assess the damage for free. He spent 2 full days examining the building, taking measurements, consulting with structural engineers, and ultimately finding a creative solution that reinforced the foundation without requiring complete reconstruction. The repairs cost a fraction of what the inspector had estimated. The shop survived. My parents' livelihood was saved. I decided that day that I wanted to be someone who solved problems that seemed impossible. Someone who looked at structures, physical structures, but also the invisible structures of finance and law and relationship that hold our lives together, and found the weaknesses before they became catastrophes. Someone who could see what others missed and prevent collapse before it happened. The irony of this isn't lost on me now. I spent my entire professional career examining foundations, testing load-bearing walls, identifying structural vulnerabilities in buildings that would serve thousands of people. And I completely failed to see the fatal flaw in the foundation of my own marriage. I was so focused on the structures I designed for others that I never thought to examine the one I was living in. I built Chen architecture from nothing, from a dream and a drafting table, and the desperate determination of a first-generation college graduate who'd watched his parents sacrifice everything for his opportunity. First, it was just me in my parents' basement, taking small residential jobs that established firms didn't want. Room additions, garage conversions, the unglamorous work that paid poorly, but built experience and reputation. Then it was me and 2 employees in a converted garage, working 80-hour weeks and learning through trial and error how to run a business, not just practice a profession. Then a real office in a modest building near downtown Sacramento. Then a bigger office. Then a move to Denver when I landed my first major contract, a regional medical center that would establish my reputation for complex healthcare facility design. By the time I was 35, Chen Architecture was designing medical facilities across Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico. We had developed a specialty in buildings that required absolute precision and trustworthiness. Hospitals, research facilities, government installations, structures where failure wasn't an inconvenience, but a potential disaster. Our reputation was built on meticulous attention to detail, on catching problems before they became expensive or dangerous, on delivering projects that met every specification and often exceeded client expectations. Derek Whitmore joined me 8 years into that journey. He came highly recommended from a firm in Phoenix that had collapsed during the 2008 financial crisis. Derek was everything I wasn't. Charismatic, effortlessly social, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of skeptical executives and walk out with a signed contract. He was handsome in a conventional way, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested expensive tastes and careful grooming. He laughed easily, told entertaining stories, remembered everyone's spouse's name and children's birthdays. I was the design and execution engine, the one who could look at a complex project and see exactly how it needed to be built. Derek was the rainmaker, the schmoozer, the one who brought in the clients and kept them happy while I focused on making sure their buildings would stand for 100 years. We were a classic double act, the visionary and the pragmatist, the architect and the businessman. We complemented each other perfectly, or so I thought. I offered him a partnership, 55-45, with me retaining majority control. It seemed fair at the time. I'd built the company from nothing. He was joining an established enterprise with existing contracts and reputation. He negotiated briefly, accepted, and for the next 15 years, Chen Architecture grew into one of the most respected regional firms in the Western United States. I was so grateful to have found someone I could trust with the business side of things that I never questioned whether that trust was deserved. I married my college sweetheart in 1999, 2 years after we both graduated from Berkeley. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, and she was the most straightforward person I'd ever met. An English professor who said exactly what she meant, loved deeply and openly, and had no patience for games or pretense or the social maneuvering that exhausted me. We had 2 children, my son Daniel, now 22 and finishing his final year of law school at Georgetown, and my daughter Lily, 19, and studying molecular biology at Stanford with the same focused intensity I brought to my own work. Our marriage wasn't perfect. No marriage is. But it was structurally sound. We argued about money and parenting and whose turn it was to handle the dishes. We went through periods where work consumed too much of our attention, and we had to deliberately reconnect. We made mistakes and apologized and grew together over 2 decades of building a life. When Sarah was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 43, our world collapsed with the sudden totality of a building demolished by controlled explosion. One day, we were planning a 20th anniversary trip to Italy. 6 months later, I was holding her hand in a hospital room I'd helped design 15 years earlier, watching the monitors flatline, feeling something fundamental in my own architecture go dark. The grief was a demolition, not sudden, but systematic. Every day for 2 years, I would wake up and reach for her side of the bed, and the emptiness there would knock another piece of my foundation loose. I worked 18-hour days because work was the only structure I had left, the only thing that made sense when nothing else did. I raised my teenagers as best I could, trying to be both parents while barely managing to be one. I went through the motions of living while feeling like the essential part of me had been removed. Raymond Torres watched me during those years with increasing concern. He'd been Sarah's attorney too, had helped us with estate planning and wills and the medical directives that became necessary far too soon. He knew how much I'd lost. "Marcus," he said once, over whiskey in his office late at night, "Sarah would want you to live. She loved you too much to want you spending the rest of your life as a ghost haunting your own house. She'd want you to find someone who makes you happy, someone who brings the light back." "Maybe someday," I told him, looking out at the Denver skyline, at the buildings that define the landscape, structures designed by dozens of architects, each one someone's life work. "I'm not ready yet." "You'll know when you are." Someday came faster than I expected. I met Victoria Ashford at a charity gala in downtown Denver in the spring of 2021, 3 years after Sarah's death. It was a fundraiser for pediatric cancer research, an event I attended every year in Sarah's memory, usually writing a substantial check, making brief small talk with the organizers, and leaving as soon as politeness allowed. I didn't enjoy these events. The forced cheerfulness, the networking, the way people looked at me with that particular expression reserved for wealthy widowers, a combination of sympathy and speculation that made my skin crawl. I was planning to stay for exactly 90 minutes, enough time to satisfy my social obligations, and then escape to the quiet of my empty house. I was standing near the silent auction table, pretending to study a vacation package I had no intention of bidding on, when I noticed her. She was examining a painting on the far end of the table, a small oil canvas in an ornate frame, with an intensity of focus that reminded me of how I looked at architectural drawings. Not just glancing, but studying, analyzing, seeing things that casual observers would miss. Something about that focus drew me across the room. "That's a reproduction," I said, walking up beside her. "The original is in a private collection in Geneva, I think. A Moreau. One of his lesser-known pieces, but still worth several million." She turned to look at me, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not the thunderbolt of romantic movies, but something quieter and more dangerous. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. She had dark hair that fell past her shoulders in soft waves, green eyes that seemed to assess me as thoroughly as she'd assessed the painting, and a presence that demanded attention without actively seeking it. She was beautiful, but that wasn't what caught me. Lots of women are beautiful. What caught me was the intelligence in her gaze, the sense that she was seeing past my expensive suit and generous donor status to something underneath. "I know it's a reproduction," she said, and her voice had a slight warmth to it, a hint of amusement. "But it's a very good one. The brushwork in the lower left corner is almost identical to Moreau's technique. The way he layered the shadows to create depth. Most copies miss the texture completely. They get the colors right, but not the feel." She smiled, and something in that smile made me want to keep talking to her. "I appreciate it when someone takes the time to do a reproduction properly. There's a kind of integrity in good imitation." I was intrigued in a way I hadn't been intrigued by anyone since Sarah. "You know art," I said. It wasn't a question. I was an art history major at Wellesley before I realized that knowing about beautiful things doesn't pay the bills. Switched to finance and wealth management. Now I help people who can afford original Moreaus decide what to do with their money. She extended her hand, her grip firm and professional. "Victoria Ashford, and you're Marcus Chen. I recognize you from the program. You're one of the major donors tonight. Your wife died of cancer 3 years ago, and you've given over $200,000 to pediatric cancer research since then. You own one of the most successful architecture firms in the region. You have 2 children in college, and you haven't dated anyone seriously since you became a widower." I blinked. "You've done your research." "I'm a wealth manager. Research is what I do." She smiled again, taking any edge off the statement. "I apologize if that seems intrusive. I noticed you earlier and asked the event coordinator about you. I find that knowing who I'm talking to prevents awkward misunderstandings." "And what did your research tell you about why you wanted to talk to me?" She laughed, a genuine laugh, not the practiced social laugh I heard at every one of these events. "Honestly, I watched you for about 10 minutes before you came over here. You looked miserable. You kept checking your watch like you were counting down to an escape. And then you saw me looking at this painting and your whole expression changed. You went from enduring the evening to being actually present." She tilted her head, studying me. I wanted to meet the person who could be that passionate about art while being that uncomfortable at a party. It seemed like an interesting contradiction. We talked for 2 hours that night, long past the point when I'd planned to leave. She told me about her background, born in Connecticut to a family with old money and new problems, educated at the best schools, worked her way up in finance despite the industry's persistent boys' club mentality. She'd never married, she said, because she'd never met anyone who made marriage seem like an improvement over independence. She'd recently moved to Denver to care for her aging mother, who had Alzheimer's and needed constant supervision. "It's exhausting," she admitted, "but she's my mother. You don't abandon family when they become inconvenient." Something about that statement resonated with me deeply. Sarah had died surrounded by family, with me holding her hand, with Daniel and Lily in the room. The worst thing I could imagine was dying alone, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you. Victoria was warm in a way that felt deliberate but not false. She asked intelligent questions about my work, questions that showed she understood what architects actually did, not just the glamorized TV version. She remembered details from our conversation without seeming to try. She laughed at my terrible jokes in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. She didn't remind me of Sarah. That was important. I wasn't looking for a replacement, a substitute, a way to pretend that my first marriage hadn't ended in tragedy. I wanted something new, something to fill the void without erasing what had been there before. Victoria seemed like she might be that something. We exchanged phone numbers at the end of the evening. She texted me the next day, a simple message saying she'd enjoyed talking to me and hoped we might do it again sometime. 2 days later, I asked her to dinner. She accepted. We dated for a year before I proposed. Slowly at first, cautiously, feeling out whether this was genuine connection or just two lonely people using each other to avoid being alone. But the more time I spent with her, the more I believed it was real. She was attentive without being smothering. She supported my work without trying to compete with it. She got along well with Daniel and Lily, who were cautiously supportive of their father finding happiness again, even if they harbored natural reservations about anyone trying to take their mother's place. When I proposed, on a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Denver skyline, with a ring that had taken me 3 months to design myself, she cried and said yes, and told me she'd never expected to find love at 41, but that I'd made her believe in impossible things. We were married 8 months later, in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley. Daniel served as my best man. Lily was Victoria's maid of honor, a gesture Victoria had suggested, saying she wanted my daughter to feel included rather than displaced. Raymond Torres and his wife sat in the front row. Victoria's mother, in a rare moment of lucidity, cried happy tears and told me she was grateful her daughter had finally found someone worthy of her. Victoria's mother died 6 months after our wedding, peacefully, in her sleep, in the memory care facility where she'd spent her final years. Victoria grieved with a dignity that impressed me. She cried privately, handled the arrangements efficiently, and then returned to our life together, with what seemed like renewed commitment. "Life is short," she told me, curled against my side in bed one night. My mother reminded me of that. We have to appreciate every day we have together. For the first 3 years of our marriage, I was happier than I had been since Sarah died. Possibly happier than I had been in the final years of my first marriage, when the stress of building a business and raising teenagers had sometimes strained our relationship. Victoria transformed our house, Sarah's house, the house where I'd lived with my first wife and raised my children, in ways that felt like evolution rather than erasure. She didn't throw out Sarah's things or insist on removing every trace of my former life. She integrated herself into the existing structure, adding her own touches while respecting what had been there before. New curtains, a reorganized kitchen, a garden she planted in the backyard, which she tended with surprising dedication. She was a calming presence, an organizing force. Where I was prone to working until exhaustion and neglecting my own needs, Victoria ensured I ate regular meals, took breaks, got enough sleep. She managed our household with the same efficiency she'd brought to her career in wealth management, creating systems and schedules that made daily life run smoothly. She cooked for me constantly. That was her love language, she explained. Growing up, her mother had shown affection through food, elaborate meals prepared with care, the kitchen as a site of nurturing and connection. Victoria had inherited that tradition, and she brought it into our marriage with enthusiasm. Elaborate dinners 3 or 4 times a week, fresh bread on weekends, my favorite beef bourguignon whenever I seemed stressed or tired, homemade soups when I was feeling under the weather, lunches packed for me to take to the office because she worried about me eating fast food between meetings. I gained 12 pounds in our first year of marriage. I was perpetually full, perpetually content. "You're too skinny," Victoria would say, loading my plate with seconds before I'd finished my firsts. "You work too hard. You forget to take care of yourself. That's my job now, making sure you keep your strength up." I loved being taken care of. After years of being the caretaker, for my sick wife, for my grieving children, for my employees and clients, and everyone else who depended on me, it felt like luxury to have someone focused on my well-being. What I didn't realize was that I was being fattened for slaughter. The symptoms started approximately 18 months into our marriage, so gradually that I barely noticed them at first. Fatigue was the first thing, not the normal tiredness that comes with running a demanding business and maintaining an active social life, but something deeper and more persistent. I would wake up after 8 hours of sleep feeling like I hadn't rested at all. By mid-afternoon, I would find myself struggling to focus on meetings, my attention drifting despite my best efforts. Coffee stopped helping. Exercise, which had always energized me, left me drained for hours afterward. I attributed it to age. I was 45, then 46. My father had always said that the body started failing at 50. Maybe I was just getting an early start. I cut back on late nights at the office. I tried to be more disciplined about work-life balance. The fatigue persisted. Then came the headaches. Dull at first, easily dismissed as tension from staring at computer screens or stress from difficult projects. Then sharper, more frequent, the kind of pain that made me want to close my eyes and lie down in a dark room. I started keeping ibuprofen in my desk drawer, then my car, then my bedside table. Some days I would take 6 or 8 pills just to make it through. The metallic taste in my mouth appeared around the same time, a persistent coppery flavor that I couldn't explain or eliminate. I tried different toothpastes, different mouthwashes. I assumed it was a side effect of the blood pressure medication my doctor had prescribed after my last physical showed slightly elevated numbers. Dr. Angela Morrison, who'd been treating me for 15 years, who'd seen me through Sarah's illness and death and my own descent into workaholism as a coping mechanism, ran tests and found nothing definitive. "Your blood work is a little off," she told me during a follow-up appointment, frowning at her computer screen. "Mild anemia, which could explain the fatigue. Slightly elevated liver enzymes, which we should monitor. Nothing that points to a specific diagnosis, but definitely something to keep an eye on." She adjusted my medications. She recommended stress reduction, better sleep hygiene, regular exercise. She suggested I take a vacation, actual time away from work, not just a long weekend checking emails from a beach. "You've been running yourself into the ground for years, Marcus," she said gently. "Your body is trying to tell you something. Listen to it." Victoria was concerned, attentive. She researched supplements that might help with fatigue. B vitamins, iron, adaptogenic herbs with names I couldn't pronounce. She ordered them from a high-end wellness company that specialized in formulations for executives who worked too many hours. She adjusted her cooking to be lower in sodium, higher in iron-rich foods. She watched me take my vitamins every morning and made sure I drank enough water throughout the day. "I'm worried about you," she would say, brushing her fingers through my hair as I sat at the kitchen table, too tired to make conversation. "You're not yourself. Let me take care of you." I let her. I was grateful. What kind of husband wouldn't be grateful for a wife so devoted to his well-being? The tremors started about 6 months before Raymond's call, a fine shaking in my fingers that I noticed first when I was trying to hold a pen steady over architectural drawings. Then a more general unsteadiness that made me grip the stair railing tighter than I used to, that made me careful getting out of bed in the morning because my legs felt unreliable. The memory issues came next. Small things at first. Forgetting where I'd left my keys, losing track of appointments, spacing out mid-conversation, and having to ask people to repeat themselves. I'd always had an excellent memory. the kind that could recall specific details from meetings held months earlier. Now I was writing everything down because I couldn't trust my own brain to hold information. Dr. Morrison referred me to a neurologist who ran more tests, MRI, cognitive assessments, nerve conduction studies, nothing definitive. Possible early-onset neuropathy, possible chronic fatigue syndrome, possible stress-related cognitive decline, possible. The human body is complicated, the neurologist told me. Sometimes systems start failing and we can't identify a specific cause. The good news is, we're not seeing anything that suggests a degenerative condition. The bad news is, I can't tell you exactly what's wrong or how to fix it. My recommendation is supportive care, rest, nutrition, stress management, and regular monitoring to make sure nothing progresses. Victoria came to every appointment with me. She took notes, asked thoughtful questions, researched the conditions the doctors mentioned. She became my advocate in a medical system that seemed unable to help me. "We'll figure this out," she promised me after yet another inconclusive appointment. "Whatever's happening, we'll find an answer. I'm not going to let anything happen to you." I believed her. I trusted her completely. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that she already knew exactly what was happening to me. She knew because she was causing it. The first real anomaly, the first crack in the facade that should have made me suspicious but didn't, occurred 8 months before Raymond's Sunday phone call. It was a Friday night in late February, and I was working late at the office. A hospital expansion project in Phoenix had fallen behind schedule due to supply chain issues and unexpected soil conditions at the site. The contractor was threatening to pull out. The client was demanding explanations. I needed to review the structural modifications our engineers had proposed and be ready for a Monday meeting that could save or sink the entire project. Everyone else had gone home hours earlier. My assistant, Janet, had reluctantly left around 7 after I assured her I would eat the sandwich she'd ordered for me and not work past midnight. Derek had stopped by around 6 to check on my progress and offer encouragement before heading out to what he described as an important networking dinner. I was alone in my corner office, papers spread across my desk, building plans tacked to the wall, coffee growing cold beside my keyboard, when my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Working late again? Don't forget to eat dinner. There's leftover pasta in the fridge at home if you want something when you get back. Love you. Sleep well when you finally come to bed." A normal text. Normal concern. Normal wife. But something, a flicker of unease I couldn't rationalize, an instinct I should have paid more attention to, made me open our home security app. I don't know why. Boredom, maybe. Procrastination. Or some part of my subconscious that had noticed something my conscious mind was still refusing to acknowledge. Our security system was state-of-the-art. I'd insisted on it after a string of burglaries in our neighborhood 2 years earlier. Motion sensors, smart locks, and cameras covering the front door, back door, garage entrance, and main living areas. Victoria had initially resisted the cameras inside the house, calling them invasive, but had eventually agreed after I promised they were for security only, and that I almost never reviewed the footage. That was true. I almost never looked at it. The system stored recordings for 30 days and then automatically deleted them unless flagged. Most of it was painfully mundane. Delivery people dropping off packages, Victoria leaving for errands, the occasional deer wandering through our yard. That night, sitting alone in my office with a puzzle I couldn't solve, I found myself scrolling backward through the day's recordings. At 2:47 p.m., Victoria left the house through the garage door. I watched her walk to her car with a purposeful stride, dressed nicely in a blue dress I'd bought her for her birthday, carrying a small leather bag I didn't recognize. A structured tote, too small for groceries, too formal for gym clothes. She backed out of the driveway and drove away. She didn't return until 6:15 p.m., 3 hours and 28 minutes later. That wasn't unusual in itself. Victoria had friends. She sat on the board of a local arts nonprofit. She ran errands that took her all over the city. Married people weren't required to report every movement to each other. But she'd told me that morning, I remembered it clearly because we'd discussed it over breakfast, that she planned to stay home all day. She was going to organize the guest room, catch up on correspondence for her nonprofit board, and start preparing for the dinner party we were hosting the following weekend. "I'm going to be a total homebody," she'd said, kissing me goodbye. "Call me if you need anything. I'll be here all day." But she hadn't been there. She'd been somewhere else, for over 3 hours, dressed nicely, carrying a bag I'd never seen. I told myself I was being paranoid. People change plans. Maybe a friend had called with an invitation she couldn't refuse. Maybe a board meeting had been scheduled last minute. There were 1,000 innocent explanations. I closed the security app and went back to my architectural drawings. But I didn't forget. A small crack had appeared in the foundation, and even though I wasn't ready to admit what it might mean, some part of me had started paying closer attention. Over the next 3 months, I watched my wife with new eyes, casually, carefully, trying not to let her see that anything had changed. I noticed patterns I hadn't noticed before. She was protective of her phone in ways that seemed excessive for someone with nothing to hide. When texts came in, she angled the screen away from me before checking them. She kept it face down on tables, something she claimed was about being present, but which now seemed strategic. She never left it unattended when I was nearby. She made phone calls from the backyard, from the garage, from the bathroom with the door closed and the fan running. "Client calls," she explained when I asked. "Confidentiality requirements. You understand?" I understood that I was being lied to. I just didn't understand why. Her spending patterns, when I looked at our joint credit card statements, showed regular purchases I couldn't account for, a boutique I didn't recognize, charging $300 or $400 every few weeks, a restaurant I'd never heard of, appearing monthly, cash withdrawals that accumulated to substantial amounts. When I asked her about the boutique, she smiled easily and said it was where she bought skincare products, very expensive creams and serums that promised to fight aging. "You want me to stay beautiful for you, don't you?" When I asked about the restaurant, she said it was where she had lunch meetings with potential donors for her nonprofit. "Networking, honey. It's part of the job." The explanations were plausible. They satisfied my surface-level concerns while leaving my deeper unease untouched. I started recording the details. Not formally, not in a file or a document, but in my memory. Dates when she said she'd be home but wasn't. Times her explanations didn't quite add up. Moments when her smile seemed slightly off, slightly too wide, slightly too quick to appear. I was building a case, even though I didn't want to acknowledge what I was building it for. The second anomaly, the one that made it impossible to maintain my denial, came 3 months later, in late May. I'd been having a particularly difficult week physically. The fatigue had intensified to the point where I was taking breaks between meetings just to close my eyes and breathe. The headaches were constant now, a low-grade throbbing that spiked into sharp pain whenever I tried to concentrate. The tremor in my hands had spread to my arms, making me self-conscious about reaching for things in front of other people. Victoria had been especially attentive that week, cooking my favorite meals every night, bringing me tea and honey before bed, rubbing my temples when I complained about headaches, insisting I take extra supplements because I looked depleted. "You're working yourself to death," she said, her voice thick with concern. "I'm going to take better care of you, starting now." On Thursday of that week, I came home early from the office. The headache had become unbearable around 2 p.m., a stabbing pain behind my right eye that made it impossible to look at architectural drawings or computer screens. I'd asked my assistant to clear my afternoon appointments and driven home with the sun visor down and my eyes half closed against the light. I didn't tell Victoria I was coming. I didn't think to. I just wanted to lie down in a dark room and wait for the pain to pass. I walked into my house at 2:34 p.m. The front door was unlocked, which was normal. Victoria often left it unlocked during the day, despite my reminders about security. I heard voices coming from my study. The study was my private space, a room at the back of the house where I kept personal files, family photographs, architectural awards, and a small desk for working from home. Victoria used it occasionally to handle correspondence or make phone calls, which I'd never minded. It was our house now, not just mine. But these weren't the sounds of someone making phone calls. These were voices, Victoria's voice, and someone else's. A man. Low, intense, clearly in the middle of a serious conversation. I stood frozen in the hallway, just outside the study door, which was open about 3 inches, enough for the voices to carry, enough for me to hear what I was never supposed to hear. "Need to be patient, Vic." The man's voice was familiar in a way that made my stomach clench, but in my confusion and pain, I couldn't immediately place it. "If you rush this, we lose everything. The timeline is the timeline. We agreed on it for a reason. I'm tired of waiting." Victoria's voice was sharp, frustrated, nothing like the warm and supportive tone I was used to hearing from her. "It's been 18 months of this slow burn approach. And honestly, Derek, I'm not sure my nerves can take much more. The insurance policy clears in 6 months. How much longer after that? Another year of playing the devoted wife while he stumbles around the house forgetting where he put his keys? Derek, my business partner, my friend of 15 years, the godfather of my daughter." I felt the world tilt sideways. As long as it takes to do this right. Derek's voice was patient, reasonable, the voice he used with difficult clients, the voice of someone managing a complicated situation. You knew the parameters going in. A slow decline that mimics natural illness, symptoms that could be explained by stress, age, overwork. Doctors who scratch their heads but never find anything definitive. When he finally goes, everyone will say it was tragic, but not surprising. The workaholic who never took care of himself. The grieving widower who never recovered from losing his first wife. A heart attack or stroke that comes out of nowhere, but makes perfect sense in retrospect. "And what if he doesn't go?" Victoria snapped. "What if his body fights it off? What if some doctor actually figures out what's happening? We're not dealing with a healthy 30-year-old here, Derek. He should be declining faster than this. His constitution is stronger than we expected. That's not necessarily bad. It makes the timeline more believable. A sudden collapse would raise questions. A gradual decline over 2 or 3 years? That's just life. That's middle-aged men who don't take care of themselves." I pushed the door open. Victoria and Derek were standing on opposite sides of my desk, leaning toward each other with the intensity of conspirators interrupted. They both turned to look at me and I watched their faces go through a rapid sequence of expressions. Surprise, fear, and then something smooth and concerned that settled over Victoria's features like a mask sliding into place. "Marcus!" She moved toward me immediately, her voice shifting into the warm, worried tone I'd come to trust. "You're home early. You scared me half to death. What's wrong? Are you feeling all right?" "You look terrible, honey." Derek's recovery was equally smooth. He straightened his jacket, ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, and smiled the confident smile that had closed 1,000 deals. "Hey, buddy. Didn't expect to see you. Just stopped by to drop off some papers for your review. The Phoenix contract revisions. Victoria was kind enough to let me wait and offer me something to drink. We got to chatting about the business. You know how it is." I looked at the desk. There was indeed a stack of blueprints and contract documents there, with Derek's handwriting visible on sticky notes attached to various pages. It looked legitimate. It looked like exactly what he claimed it was. "What were you two talking about when I came in?" My voice was flat, carefully controlled, revealing nothing of the hurricane building inside my chest. I heard something about a timeline, about patience. "Work stuff, Marcus." Derek waved dismissively, his tone taking on a faintly patronizing note. "The Phoenix expansion is on a strict timeline, and Victoria was asking when you'd finally be able to take a vacation without the whole project falling apart." I was explaining that these things take time, that you can't rush quality, and that she shouldn't pressure you to step back faster than is healthy for the business. He clapped me on the shoulder, a familiar gesture that now felt like a threat. "You look rough, by the way. Seriously rough. Have you been sleeping? Eating properly?" Victoria had reached me by then. She put her hand on my arm, her grip firm, almost too firm. Her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that might have been concern or might have been warning. "Honey, you look like you're about to collapse. Let me make you some tea. You should lie down. Derek was just leaving anyway, weren't you, Derek?" "Absolutely." Derek gathered the papers from the desk, tucking them under his arm with practiced efficiency. "Feel better, Marcus. We need you sharp for the Phoenix presentation next week. Can't have the principal architect looking like death warmed over in front of the client." He laughed at his own joke. I didn't. After he left, Victoria led me to the bedroom, helped me lie down, and brought me chamomile tea with honey, her standard remedy for everything from headaches to heartbreak. She sat beside me on the bed, stroking my hair, telling me how worried she'd been about my health, how much she wanted me to see another specialist, how she was considering hiring a nutritionist to help optimize my diet. "You're my whole world, Marcus," she said softly. "I can't lose you. I won't lose you." I drank the tea. I closed my eyes. I pretended to sleep while my wife kissed my forehead and told me she loved me. And I replayed the conversation I'd overheard on an endless loop, examining every word for hidden meaning. 18 months of this slow burn approach. The insurance policy clears in 6 months. A slow decline that mimics natural illness. When he finally goes. They weren't talking about architecture. They weren't discussing work timelines or business pressures. They were discussing my death. The scheduled, planned, carefully managed end of my life. And the people scheduling it were my wife and my best friend. I didn't confront them. I didn't call the police. I didn't do any of the things that a person in a movie would do upon discovering that their spouse and business partner were conspiring to murder them. Instead, I did what I'd been trained to do my entire professional life. I gathered evidence. I examined the structure. I looked for the load-bearing elements and the points of failure. I started by quietly investigating my own medical records. Using my patient portal access, I downloaded every test result, every lab report, every physician's note from the past 2 years. I wasn't a medical professional, but I'd designed enough healthcare facilities to have a working knowledge of diagnostic terminology. I looked for patterns. What I found was consistent with what the doctors had told me. Unexplained decline across multiple systems. No single definitive diagnosis. Symptoms that suggested something was wrong without pointing to a specific cause. I also found something else. 3 blood tests over the past 18 months had shown slightly elevated levels of certain metals, not high enough to trigger alarm, but present in amounts that Dr. Morrison had flagged as monitor and retest. The levels had been gradually increasing over time. I wasn't a toxicologist, but I knew what chronic heavy metal poisoning looked like. I dealt with it as a structural issue in old buildings, where lead paint and contaminated soil could slowly poison occupants over years. The symptoms matched what I was experiencing: fatigue, neurological problems, cognitive decline. The realization hit me like a collapsing beam. I was being poisoned. Slowly, systematically. In doses small enough to avoid detection, but large enough to gradually destroy my health. And Victoria was the one preparing all my food. The third anomaly, the one that confirmed everything, occurred 2 weeks after I overheard the conversation in my study. I'd spent those 2 weeks carefully observing Victoria without letting her see that anything had changed. I ate her cooking because refusing would have raised suspicion, but I ate less of it, making excuses about appetite and nausea. I started skipping the supplements she gave me, palming the pills and flushing them later. I told her I was feeling slightly better, that maybe the new routine was helping. Her response to my reported improvement was subtle but noticeable. A flicker of frustration behind her concerned smile, an increased insistence that I take my vitamins, larger portions at dinner, more frequent reminders to finish my plate. On a Saturday morning in early June, I was reaching for the supplement bottle on my nightstand, the clear glass container of expensive wellness pills that Victoria had been providing for months, when I noticed something wrong. The plastic seal around the cap looked different. There was a tiny scratch near the rim, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, as if someone had used a sharp tool to carefully cut the seal, open the bottle, and then reseal it imperfectly. I examined the pills more closely. They were supposed to be uniform, compressed tablets with a clear coating, identical in size and color. But several of them had slight irregularities. The coating was thicker on some. The color was marginally different. And when I pressed one between my fingers, it left a faint residue that didn't match the others. Someone had opened this bottle and tampered with the contents. Someone had added something to my supplements. I didn't take any of them. I slipped the bottle into my pocket, made my way downstairs, and sat at the kitchen table while Victoria prepared breakfast. "Aren't you going to take your vitamins, honey?" she asked, watching me carefully. "You said you were feeling better, but Dr. Morrison said consistency is important." "I took them upstairs," I lied, forcing a smile. "I must have left the bottle by the bathroom sink." I watched her face for the reaction. It was there, just for a moment, a flash of disappointment, quickly suppressed. Then the warm smile returned, and she slid a plate of eggs in front of me and told me to eat up because I needed to keep my strength up. I ate 2 bites. I claimed nausea. I made an excuse about a work emergency that required me to go to the office. I drove straight to Raymond Torres's office, even though it was Saturday and I didn't have an appointment. His assistant wasn't there, but Raymond had given me a key years ago for emergencies. I let myself in, sealed the supplement bottle and the coffee cup from that morning's breakfast into separate evidence bags, and left them in his safe with a note detailing what I'd observed and what I suspected. The note ended with 3 words: "Please help me." It was the first time I'd admitted, even to myself, that I needed help, that I couldn't solve this problem alone, that the structure I'd built my life around was collapsing, and I needed someone who could see the damage clearly enough to help me survive. 3 weeks later, Raymond called me on a Sunday morning and told me not to eat my wife's cooking. And everything I thought I knew about my life ended. Raymond Torres's office had always felt like a sanctuary to me, a place of controlled rationality where complicated problems could be broken down into manageable components and solved through careful application of law and logic. On that Sunday afternoon in late October, it felt like the only solid ground left in a world that had turned to quicksand. Raymond was waiting for me when I arrived at 3 p.m., seated behind his mahogany desk with a thick folder in front of him and an expression I'd never seen before on his face, something between fury and grief. "Sit down, Marcus," he said, gesturing to the leather chair across from him. "What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to absorb, but I need you to stay calm and think clearly. We have a narrow window to act before Victoria and Derek realize that their plan has been compromised." I sat. My hands were steady. My breathing was controlled. I had spent 3 weeks preparing myself for this moment, building emotional walls strong enough to withstand whatever revelations were coming. "Start from the beginning," I said. "Tell me everything." Raymond nodded. He opened the folder and began laying documents on the desk between us, building a case with the methodical precision of a master architect constructing a foundation. 3 weeks ago, I was doing a routine review of your estate documents. The trusts, the insurance policies, the ownership structures for Chen Architecture. It's something I do annually for all my major clients, just to make sure everything is current and properly optimized. I noticed an anomaly. A life insurance policy I didn't remember drafting, taken out 18 months ago, with a death benefit of $8 million. The beneficiary was your wife, Victoria Chen. The premium payments were being automatically withdrawn from a joint account you share with her. He slid a document across the desk. I picked it up and examined it. It was a life insurance policy from a major carrier, with my name, my social security number, my signature at the bottom. Except it wasn't my signature. I've signed my name hundreds of thousands of times over a 30-year career. I know exactly what my handwriting looks like. Precise, architectural, with specific proportions and angles that I've maintained since college. The signature on this document was close. Very close, but not quite right. The loops were slightly looser. The angle of the final letter was off by a few degrees. It was a sophisticated forgery. Good enough to fool a casual observer, but not good enough to fool me. "I didn't sign this," I said slowly. "I know." Raymond's voice was grim. "When I saw the policy, I was concerned. You'd never mentioned wanting additional life insurance. You already have substantial coverage through policies we established years ago, and the beneficiary structure was unusual. Normally, your children would be included. This policy names only Victoria. I did some digging. I contacted the insurance company using attorney credentials and requested the original application documents. What I found raised serious red flags. He laid out more documents. The original application, medical records that had been submitted as part of the underwriting process, bank statements showing the premium payments. The medical records submitted with this application are partially fabricated. They include your actual health history, but they omit key details, specifically the elevated metal levels that Dr. Morrison has been tracking. The application was processed through an agent who, it turns out, has handled several suspicious policies over the past decade, and the forged signature matches samples we obtained from documents Victoria has signed on your behalf for household matters. I stared at the evidence. The structure was becoming clear, a carefully constructed framework designed to look legitimate while concealing a murderous purpose. She forged the insurance policy, I said, to collect $8 million when I die. That's the beginning, but it gets worse. Raymond slid another folder across the desk. I hired a private investigator, Grace Nakamura, one of the best in the business. I asked her to look into Victoria's background, going back as far as she could trace. He paused, meeting my eyes. Omar Christian, Marcus, the woman you married doesn't exist. Grace Nakamura's report was 63 pages long, with appendices of supporting documentation that added another 100 pages. Raymond gave me the executive summary while I sat in stunned silence. Victoria Ashford was born in Connecticut in 1980, attended Wellesley College, and worked in wealth management in San Francisco before relocating to Denver to care for her mother. That's the biography she gave you. That's the woman you married. But Victoria Ashford, the real Victoria Ashford, died in a car accident in 2008, single-vehicle crash on a rural highway in Vermont. She was 28 years old, never married, no children. Her death was ruled accidental. Raymond slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a young woman with light brown hair and blue eyes, smiling at the camera. She looked nothing like my wife. The woman you know as Victoria Ashford is actually Monica Vale, born 1979 in Phoenix, Arizona. She has a criminal record dating back to her early 20s. Fraud, identity theft, forgery. She served 18 months in a minimum security facility in California for a scheme involving elderly victims and fabricated investment opportunities. After her release, she disappeared. Grace believes she spent several years perfecting her technique, identifying deceased women with clean backgrounds, assuming their identities, and using those identities to target wealthy men. You're not her first target, Marcus. You might not even be her third or fourth. The room seemed to contract around me. I forced myself to breathe, to process, to maintain the analytical detachment that had served me through every crisis of my professional life. Derek, I said. He's involved. I heard them talking. Derek Whitmore has been working with Monica, with Victoria, since at least 2012. Grace found financial connections between them going back over a decade. Shell companies, offshore accounts, coordinated movements that suggest a long-term partnership. Raymond pulled up a complex diagram on his computer monitor, turning it so I could see. It looked like an architectural schematic, but instead of load-bearing walls and support beams, it showed the flow of money through a web of corporate entities. They established a network of shell companies to launder money and hide assets. Whitmore Ventures, registered in Nevada. Phoenix Holdings, based in Delaware. An entity called Moreau Trust, a reference to the painting where you met Victoria, I assume, incorporated in the Cayman Islands. Over the past 3 years, Derek has been systematically siphoning money from Chen Architecture through fabricated vendor invoices, inflated construction costs, and phantom consulting fees. The total loss so far is approximately $280,000. Small enough to escape notice in a company with your revenue, large enough to fund their operation and establish the offshore accounts where they'll deposit your insurance payout. I thought about all the financial reports Derek had presented at our quarterly meetings, the spreadsheets I'd glanced at but never scrutinized, because I trusted him to handle the numbers. I thought about the dinners we'd shared, the golf games, the family gatherings where he'd played with my children and toasted my marriage. The insurance policy, I said. The embezzlement? What else? Raymond's expression darkened further. There's one more piece, the most damaging one. He opened a final folder and removed a single sheet of paper, a death certificate. Teresa Whitmore, Derek's first wife. She died in 2008 of what was ruled a cerebral aneurysm. Derek collected a $7 million life insurance payout. The policy had been taken out 2 years before her death. I read the death certificate, the cause of death, the attending physician's signature. Grace contacted Teresa's family, her sister specifically, who always had doubts about the circumstances of the death. The sister gave us access to Teresa's medical records from the months before she died. Marcus, she was exhibiting the same symptoms you've been experiencing: fatigue, headaches, cognitive decline, tremors. Her doctors were baffled, running test after test without finding an answer. And then she had a sudden aneurysm and died. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying precision. They've done this before, I said. Derek and Monica. They killed his first wife the same way they're trying to kill me. We believe so. Different poison. Grace thinks they used thallium with Teresa, which is harder to trace after death. But the same method. Slow poisoning over an extended period, designed to mimic natural illness, followed by a substantial insurance payout. Raymond leaned forward, his eyes intense. This isn't a crime of passion, Marcus. This isn't a wife who snapped, or a partner who got greedy. This is a professional operation, a murder-for-profit enterprise that has been running successfully for over a decade. You're not a husband they want to eliminate. You're a revenue stream they've been cultivating. I sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing the scope of the betrayal. My wife was a professional killer. My business partner was her accomplice. My marriage was a long-term assassination contract disguised as love. What do we do? I asked finally. We fight back, Raymond said. Carefully, methodically. We build an airtight case and we take them down before they can finish what they started. But first, we need to confirm what's in your system. That's why I sent you to Dr. Okonkwo. If the toxicology comes back the way I think it will, we'll have physical evidence of attempted murder to go along with the financial evidence of fraud. And then, Marcus, we set a trap. We make them think they're winning while we're actually positioning them for total destruction. We're going to need patience. We're going to need discipline. And you're going to need to go home tonight and pretend that nothing has changed. That you're still the sick, confused husband who has no idea that his wife is slowly killing him. I looked at the evidence spread across Raymond's desk. The forged insurance policy, the shell company diagrams, Teresa Whitmore's death certificate. I can do that, I said. I can pretend. I'd spent 47 years building structures designed to last for centuries. I could certainly build a facade strong enough to fool my wife for a few more weeks. Over the following 6 weeks, we constructed our case with the same systematic precision I brought to designing buildings. The first step was confirming the poisoning. Dr. Okonkwo's preliminary results came back within 48 hours, exactly as she'd promised. I was at Raymond's office when she called with the findings. The food samples contained detectable levels of arsenic trioxide, she reported, her voice calm and clinical. The concentration is significant, high enough to cause systemic damage with repeated exposure, low enough to avoid triggering immediate acute symptoms. The perpetrator knew exactly what they were doing. I also tested the supplements you provided. The contaminated pills contain a much higher concentration of arsenic, approximately 5 times what was present in the food. My hypothesis is that the food provided a baseline dose, while the supplements were used to accelerate the poisoning when desired. I thought about all the times Victoria had urged me to take my vitamins, all the mornings she'd watched me swallow those pills with a loving smile. And my hair samples? I asked. That's where it gets conclusive. Dr. Okonkwo's tone became more emphatic. Hair analysis provides a timeline. As hair grows, it incorporates substances present in the bloodstream, creating a record of exposure over time. Your hair samples show chronic arsenic exposure dating back approximately 18 months, the exact time frame mentioned in the documents your attorney showed me. Mr. Chen, the pattern is unmistakable. You have been systematically poisoned over an extended period. Without intervention, based on the accumulated levels in your system, I estimate you would have experienced organ failure within the next 4 to 6 months. 4 to 6 months. That would have put my death right on schedule for when the life insurance policy cleared its contestability period. What's the treatment? I asked. Chelation therapy. We need to bind the heavy metals in your system and help your body excrete them. I've already made arrangements with a private clinic. Discreet, no questions asked. You'll need to be admitted under a false name to avoid alerting your wife. The treatment will take several days initially, then ongoing sessions for several weeks. But the prognosis is good if we start immediately. The damage isn't irreversible yet. Raymond nodded at me. We've prepared a cover story. You're attending an executive wellness retreat in Arizona, a week of detox and stress management. Victoria won't find it suspicious. She's been pushing you to take better care of yourself. Because she wanted to be the one controlling my care, I said bitterly. Exactly. But now we use that against her. She'll think her plan is working. Meanwhile, you'll be getting the treatment that's going to save your life. I started chelation therapy 3 days later. The process was unpleasant. IV treatments that left me nauseated and weak, blood tests every few hours to monitor my levels, strict dietary restrictions to support the detoxification process. But within a week, I started feeling better than I had in months. The constant fatigue began to lift. The headaches diminished. The tremors in my hands gradually subsided. I was literally coming back to life, and my wife had no idea. While I was receiving treatment, Raymond and Grace continued building our evidence ladder. Grace obtained copies of Victoria's phone records through legal channels. Raymond had contacts at the phone company who owed him favors. The records showed regular calls and texts to a number that traced to Derek Whitmore's personal cell, far more frequent than could be explained by legitimate business contact between a company partner and an employee's wife. But the real breakthrough came from inside my own house. Before I left for my wellness retreat, I'd done something I never thought I'd do. I'd broken into my wife's private spaces. Victoria kept a small safe in our bedroom closet, one she'd brought into the marriage and never given me the combination to. Personal documents, she'd explained when I asked about it once. Old family papers, my mother's jewelry, nothing important. I'd never pressed the issue. People were entitled to privacy, even in marriage. On my last night at home before the clinic, I waited until Victoria was deeply asleep, helped along by a sleep aid I'd dissolved in her evening tea, a fitting irony, and I opened the safe. It wasn't difficult. The safe was a basic home model, and I'd designed enough secure facilities to know the weaknesses of commercial security products. 15 minutes with a few specialized tools I'd borrowed from our construction supervisor, and I was inside. What I found changed everything. The safe contained a burner phone, a cheap prepaid device that Victoria had never mentioned owning. It contained a small leather journal filled with handwritten notes in Victoria's elegant script, and it contained a manila envelope stuffed with documents that should never have existed. The burner phone was locked, but I had a solution for that too. Raymond had provided me with a cloning device, a small piece of technology that could copy the data from a locked phone given enough time. I attached the device and let it run while I examined the other contents. The journal was a revelation. Page after page of meticulous notes documenting my poisoning. The dates, the doses, my symptoms, my reactions. Victoria had been tracking my decline with the same careful attention to detail that I brought to architectural specifications. March 15th. M complained of unusual fatigue at dinner. Dose appears effective. Will maintain current level for 2 weeks before increasing. April 3rd. M having trouble with concentration. Memory issues becoming noticeable. Have encouraged him to see neurologist. Important to establish medical paper trail of declining health. May 20th. M came home unexpectedly. Nearly caught D in study. Must be more careful. D says we should accelerate timeline. Disagree. Patience is essential. Another 12 to 18 months optimal. June 8th. M discovered inconsistency in supplement capsules. Uncertain if suspicious. Prepared cover story about quality control issues from manufacturer. Must obtain new batch from D's supplier. I photographed every page. The manila envelope contained even more damaging material. Medical records from Teresa Whitmore's final months, marked with Victoria's annotations highlighting symptom progression. Receipts from a chemical supply company in Nevada showing purchases of arsenic compounds. A list of what appeared to be future targets. Names, estimated net worth, vulnerability assessments. That included 2 other Denver area widowers and a wealthy divorcee in Boulder. I was not just a victim. I was a case study. And I was not meant to be their last. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, removed the cloning device from the burner phone, and went to bed beside my wife. She stirred slightly as I slipped under the covers. "Everything okay?" she murmured sleepily. "Just got some water," I whispered. "Go back to sleep." She rolled toward me and placed her hand over my heart. "I love you, Marcus." "I love you too," I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. The next 6 weeks were a masterclass in sustained deception, on both sides. I pretended to be a dying man, slowly losing his grip on life. I stumbled. I forgot things. I let my work slip in visible ways, missing deadlines and making mistakes that Derek could observe and report to Victoria. I complained constantly about fatigue and asked Victoria to increase my supplements, watching her face light up with barely concealed satisfaction each time I swallowed the poison she'd prepared. Meanwhile, my actual health was improving dramatically. The chelation therapy had removed most of the arsenic from my system. My energy was returning. My mind was clearing. But I played the role of decline with an actor's commitment, knowing that my survival depended on my wife believing she was winning. Raymond expanded our team carefully, bringing in only people he trusted absolutely. Detective Maria Santos of the Denver Police Financial Crimes Unit became our law enforcement ally. She was a 30-year veteran with a reputation for meticulous investigation and zero tolerance for corruption. Raymond had known her for decades. They'd worked together on several cases involving corporate fraud, and he trusted her to handle the sensitive nature of our situation. "Mr. Chen," she said at our first meeting, reviewing the evidence we'd compiled, "what you're describing is a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Attempted murder, fraud, forgery, potentially serial homicide if the Teresa Whitmore case can be reopened. This is going to require coordination between multiple jurisdictions and agencies. But before we can move forward, I need to know, are you willing to see this through? Because once we start, there's no stopping. Your wife and your business partner will be arrested. Their entire scheme will become public. Your name will be in the news. Your children will have to deal with the fallout. I thought about Daniel and Lily, about the pain this revelation would cause them. I thought about the other names on Victoria's target list, the future victims she was already evaluating. I'm willing, I said, whatever it takes to stop them. Detective Santos nodded. Then let's build a case they can't escape. We set up surveillance. Discreet, legal, coordinated with law enforcement. Cameras in the house to document Victoria's actions. Financial monitoring of the shell companies to track any movements of assets. Intercepted communications from the burner phone, which the cloning device had provided full access to. The burner phone texts between Victoria and Derek were devastating in their casual cruelty. Victoria, his color is getting worse. Tremors are more visible. Dee says the next blood test should show significantly elevated markers. Derek, good. Keep pushing the supplements. The policy clears in 3 months. We need him deteriorating visibly by then. Victoria, he's so trusting. Sometimes I almost feel guilty. Then I remember the $8 million and the feeling passes. Derek, focus on the end game. Phoenix House is almost ready for the next phase. Have you identified our Boulder candidate yet? Victoria, working on it. There's a retired judge, widower, substantial real estate holdings, history of heart problems, perfect profile. I can engineer an introduction through the arts nonprofit. They were already planning their next victim while still in the process of killing me. Grace traced the financial connections further, uncovering the full extent of Derek's embezzlement from Chen Architecture. The $280,000 Raymond had initially identified was just what we could prove easily. Deeper forensic accounting suggested the actual loss might be over $500,000, hidden in a labyrinth of fake invoices, phantom vendors, and manipulated construction budgets. The Teresa Whitmore case was reopened by Phoenix Police, with Detective Santos coordinating. Grace had obtained medical records showing that Derek's first wife had exhibited the same symptoms I was experiencing, and that Derek had been the one managing her care, selecting her doctors, controlling her diet. The original medical examiner was re-interviewed and admitted that he'd had doubts about the aneurysm diagnosis, but lacked evidence to pursue an alternative explanation. Our evidence ladder was almost complete. We had documented poisoning. We had documented fraud. We had documented conspiracy. We had a pattern of behavior suggesting serial homicide. Now we needed the final piece, a confession. The trap was designed with the same attention to detail I brought to my architectural projects. Every element had a purpose. Every contingency was planned for. We would use their greed against them. The premise was simple. Make Victoria and Derek believe that their plan was succeeding beyond their wildest expectations, and then create a situation where they would incriminate themselves while trying to secure their profits. I called Derek on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks before the scheduled operation. Derek, I said, making my voice weak and confused, I need your help. I've been doing some thinking about the company, about Victoria, about what happens if I don't get better. Marcus, buddy, don't talk like that. His voice was warm, concerned, perfectly calibrated to sound like a friend offering support. You're going to be fine. The doctors will figure this out. I don't think they will. I let my voice crack slightly. I've been getting worse. The neurologist says there might be nothing they can do. And I need to make sure Victoria is taken care of. That's all I can think about now. Making sure she has everything she needs. I heard the sharp intake of breath on his end, quickly suppressed. He was a good actor, but not good enough. What are you thinking? He asked carefully. I want to move some assets. Liquid assets. things Victoria can access easily if something happens to me. I've been so focused on the trusts and the company, but none of that helps her in the short term. I need to set up something more immediate. And I need your help, because honestly, Derek, I'm not thinking clearly anymore. I need someone I trust to help me navigate this. Of course. Anything you need. That's what partners are for. Can you come to the bank with me? First National, the downtown branch? I want to open a new safety deposit box, put some important documents in it, and make sure Victoria can access everything. I'll give her power of attorney, full access to all my accounts, whatever she needs. I could almost hear him salivating through the phone. That's very thoughtful, Marcus. Victoria is lucky to have you. Can you come Monday? I'm meeting with the bank manager at 10. Victoria will be there too. I want you both to understand exactly what I'm setting up. Wouldn't miss it. After I hung up, I sat in Raymond's office and allowed myself a small, grim smile. They'll come, I told Raymond and Detective Santos, who had been listening to the call. They can't resist. They think I'm delivering myself on a silver platter. The bank manager is prepared? Santos asked. Mrs. Eleanor Vance. She's been fully briefed and is cooperating with the investigation. She'll guide the conversation exactly where we need it to go. And the FBI? Agents positioned throughout the building. The interstate fraud elements, the shell companies, the Phoenix connection. Give us federal jurisdiction. Everyone will be in place. I looked at the two people who had become my unlikely allies, the attorney who had known me for over 2 decades, and the detective who had dedicated her career to exposing exactly this kind of predatory crime. On Monday, I said, we end this. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, one of those late November days when the Denver sky is a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air has a crystalline quality that makes everything seem sharper and more defined. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that reinforced the image of a man in decline, a suit that was now slightly loose from the weight I'd lost during my illness and treatment, a shirt with a collar that didn't quite sit right. I practiced my tremor in the mirror, made sure my gait was unsteady enough to be noticeable. Victoria was solicitous as we prepared to leave. Are you sure you're up for this, honey? She asked, her eyes full of manufactured concern. We can reschedule if you're not feeling well. No. I want to do this today, while I still can. I saw the flicker of satisfaction cross her face before she suppressed it. I'm so proud of you, she said, taking my arm. Taking care of me even when you're struggling. That's what love means. I let her lead me to the car, leaning on her slightly, playing the role of the dying husband one final time. First National Bank's downtown branch was a grand old building, all marble floors and brass fixtures and the hushed atmosphere of serious money being seriously managed. Derek was waiting in the lobby when we arrived, impeccably dressed, his smile wide and welcoming. Marcus, Victoria, right on time. He clapped me on the shoulder in that familiar gesture I'd once found comforting and now recognized as possessive. You look like a man who's made an important decision. I have, I said quietly. Let's get this done. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the branch manager, emerged from her office to greet us personally. She was a dignified woman in her 50s, silver-haired and professionally dressed, with an air of competent authority that commanded respect. She had been thoroughly briefed on her role, and her performance was flawless. Mr. Chen, it's a pleasure to meet you. And Mrs. Chen, Mr. Whitmore, welcome. Please come back to my office. We can discuss your needs privately. We followed her through the main banking floor, past the teller windows and the customer service desks, into a comfortable office with mahogany furniture and framed photographs of Denver landmarks. "Now then, Mrs. Vance said, settling behind her desk. "I understand you want to establish new accounts and access arrangements for your wife. This is a significant financial decision, Mr. Chen. Are you certain about the changes you want to make?" "I am." I let my voice waver slightly. "I want to give Victoria full power of attorney over all my personal accounts. And I want to establish a new safety deposit box, the largest size you have, where I can keep important documents she'll need access to." Victoria squeezed my hand. "This is so thoughtful of you, darling." "There's also a matter of an existing safety deposit box," Mrs. Vance continued, glancing at Derek. "Mr. Whitmore, I see you and a Miss Ashford have a box registered under one of your business accounts. Shall I have both boxes prepared for access while you're here?" The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Victoria and Derek exchanged a rapid glance, half panic, half calculation. The safety deposit box was supposed to be their secret, their emergency fund, the place where they kept cash and bearer bonds that couldn't be traced. Yes, we should access that one as well," Derek said, recovering smoothly. "For administrative purposes. Completely unrelated to Marcus's arrangements, of course." "Of course." Mrs. Vance's smile was professionally bland. "I'll have both boxes brought up. Mr. Chen, while we wait, would you like to proceed with signing the power of attorney documents?" She slid a sheaf of papers across the desk. I picked up the pen with a deliberately shaking hand. "Before I sign," I said slowly, "I need to ask Victoria something." Victoria's smile flickered. "Of course, honey. Anything." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since I'd learned the truth. The green eyes I'd thought were warm were actually cold. The smile I'd thought was loving was actually calculating. The whole presentation was a masterpiece of manipulation, and I'd fallen for it completely. "Raymond told me something interesting last week," I said, my voice losing its practiced weakness and becoming clear and steady. "About the supplements you've been giving me." The color drained from Victoria's face. "He said the lab found arsenic, quite a lot of it actually, enough to kill a man over time, if administered consistently." Derek started to rise from his chair. "Marcus, I don't know what you're—" "Sit down, Derek." My voice cracked like a whip. "Or the federal agents in the next room will make you sit down." He froze halfway out of his seat. "He also told me about the life insurance policy. $8 million. Forged signature. Very professional work, Victoria. Or should I call you Monica?" Victoria's mask finally shattered. The warm, concerned wife disappeared, replaced by something cold and furious. "You idiot," she hissed. "After all this time, after all the work I put into this, you finally figured it out? You weren't supposed to live long enough to figure anything out. You were supposed to be too sick, too confused, too dependent on me to question anything. Sorry to disappoint you. This is ridiculous." Derek had recovered his composure, the businessman's armor sliding back into place. "Victoria is clearly upset, and you're obviously confused. Whatever Raymond told you, it's a misunderstanding. Let's all calm down and—" "The chemical supply company in Nevada," I interrupted. "The one where you've been ordering arsenic trioxide for the past 2 years. Grace found the receipts in your wife's safe, Derek, along with notes documenting how much she was giving me and what symptoms she expected to see." Derek's face went gray. "And Teresa, your first wife. Did you think no one would ever look closely enough at how she died? Phoenix Police has reopened the investigation. They're very interested in the similarity between her symptoms and mine." "You can't prove anything," Victoria spat. You can't. I can prove everything. I stood up, no longer pretending weakness. The poisoned food, the tampered supplements, the forged insurance policy, the shell companies laundering money from my firm, the burner phone with texts planning my murder. It's all documented, all recorded, all verified by forensic experts and reviewed by federal prosecutors. I walked to the office door and opened it. Detective Santos was standing on the other side, flanked by 2 FBI agents in tactical gear. Victoria Chen, also known as Monica Vale, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy, Santos announced, stepping into the room. Derek Whitmore, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to attempted murder, with additional charges pending related to the death of Teresa Whitmore. Victoria lunged toward the window, as if she could somehow escape through reinforced glass 3 stories above the street. One of the agents caught her before she got 2 steps. "You should have just eaten the casserole, Marcus," she screamed as they handcuffed her. "It was the cleanest one I ever made. No one would have known. You'd be dead, and I'd be on a beach with $8 million. Instead, you ruined everything. Everything." She was still screaming as they led her out of the office, past the stunned bank employees and the undercover agents who had been posing as customers, toward the waiting police vehicles. Derek went quietly, his face blank, the consummate businessman even in complete defeat. As he passed me, he paused. "I underestimated you," he said quietly. "That was my mistake." "One of many," I replied. The handcuffs clicked shut, and the agents led him away. I stood in the empty doorway of Mrs. Vance's office, watching the 2 people who had conspired to murder me for profit disappear into federal custody. Raymond appeared beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Marcus." I shook my head slowly. "No, this is just the beginning. Now comes the trial, the publicity, explaining to my children that their stepmother tried to kill me. Rebuilding the company that my partner looted. This is going to take years." "Yes," Raymond agreed. "But you'll be alive for those years. That's what matters." I thought about the casserole that had been sitting on my kitchen counter 2 months earlier. Warm, fragrant, deadly. "Yeah," I said finally. "I guess it is." The trial of Victoria Chen, Monica Vale, and Derek Whitmore became one of the most closely followed criminal cases in Colorado in decades. The combination of elements, attempted murder by poisoning, financial fraud, serial predation, the betrayal of marriage and business partnership, captured public attention in a way that made the courthouse a circus of media attention every day of the proceedings. I was called to testify 3 times. The first time was during Victoria's trial, which proceeded separately from Derek's due to the different nature of their charges. I sat in the witness box and answered questions about our marriage, our daily routines, the food she prepared, the supplements she insisted I take. I described discovering her true identity, the journal documenting my poisoning, the texts on the burner phone. Victoria watched me from the defense table with an expression that shifted between fury and contempt. Her attorney, a high-priced criminal defense lawyer named Patricia Blackwell, who had a reputation for getting wealthy defendants acquitted, tried to paint me as a paranoid husband who had misinterpreted normal marital behavior. "Isn't it true, Mr. Chen, that you began suspecting your wife of infidelity before any evidence of poisoning emerged?" Blackwell asked during cross-examination. "I noticed inconsistencies in her stated whereabouts," I replied calmly. "I observed her meeting with my business partner privately. I became curious about patterns that didn't fit her explanations." So you were spying on your wife, checking her movements, going through her personal belongings. I was investigating threats to my safety, Ms. Blackwell. The difference between paranoia and prudence is whether the threat is real. In this case, my wife was systematically poisoning me. I'd say my suspicions were justified. And you expect this jury to believe that a woman with no prior record of violence. Monica Vale has a criminal record for fraud targeting elderly victims, I interrupted. The woman you're defending doesn't exist. Victoria Ashford died in 2008. Your client stole her identity and used it to position herself close to wealthy widowers she planned to murder for their insurance money. I was her current project. There were others before me, and there would have been others after if we hadn't stopped her. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. The hair analysis showing 18 months of arsenic exposure, the toxicology reports on the food and supplements, the forged insurance policy with the faked signature, the journal in Victoria's own handwriting documenting her crime, the text messages coordinating with Derek. Victoria's defense was that I had poisoned myself to frame her, a desperate gambit that required the jury to believe I had somehow obtained arsenic, administered it to myself in precise doses over 18 months while experiencing genuine physiological decline, and then constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory involving my wife and business partner. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: attempted first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, identity theft, forgery. Victoria was sentenced to 35 years to life in prison. She would be eligible for parole in 2049, at age 70. Derek's trial focused on his role as co-conspirator and his embezzlement from Chen Architecture. The prosecution also presented evidence linking him to Teresa Whitmore's death, though formal murder charges in that case were still being developed by Phoenix authorities. He was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to attempted murder, multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, and money laundering. His sentence was 30 years in federal prison, with the understanding that additional charges from Arizona might extend his incarceration further. I watched both sentencings from the gallery, sitting between Daniel and Lily, who had taken time from their studies to be present for the end of this nightmare. "Are you okay, Dad?" Lily asked after Victoria was led away in shackles. I thought about the question carefully before answering. I don't know if okay is the right word, but I'm alive, and I'm going to stay that way. Right now, that's enough. The aftermath of the trial extended for over 2 years. Financially, the recovery was complex, but ultimately successful. Raymond and a team of forensic accountants traced every dollar Derek had stolen and mapped every asset hidden in the network of shell companies. The offshore accounts were frozen and eventually recovered through international legal cooperation. The Phoenix house that Victoria had mentioned in her texts was sold, and the proceeds returned to Chen Architecture's accounts. The recovered assets, combined with insurance settlements related to the criminal conduct, actually left me in a stronger financial position than before the crimes were discovered. There was a brutal irony in that. My wife had tried to kill me for money, and her failure had made me wealthier. I sold my majority share in Chen Architecture to Patricia Kwan, who had been my COO for 5 years and had proven herself during the crisis that followed Derek's arrest. She paid fair market value, which was substantial, and I retained a small percentage as a silent partner. Daniel, who passed the bar exam 6 months after Derek's sentencing, joined the firm as general counsel, a position that let him honor our family legacy while building his own career. Lily completed her biology degree with honors and went on to graduate school at MIT, pursuing research in toxicology. She told me once that watching my case unfold had given her a sense of purpose, She wanted to help develop better methods for detecting chronic poisoning, so that future victims might be identified faster than I was. The house, the house where I'd lived with Sarah, raised my children, and nearly died at Victoria's hands, was sold within a year of the trial. I couldn't bear to live there anymore, surrounded by memories that had been poisoned as surely as my body. I bought a smaller place in the foothills west of Denver, a modern structure with clean lines and large windows that looked out over the mountains. I designed the renovation myself, turning the project into a kind of therapy, rebuilding a space the same way I was rebuilding my life. Raymond remained my closest friend, our bond strengthened by the crisis we'd navigated together. He retired from active practice 2 years after the trial, though he kept an office where he consulted on particularly interesting cases. We had dinner together every few weeks, trading stories about our respective second acts. Detective Santos stayed in touch as well. She used the Victoria Chen case to advocate for better training on detecting domestic poisoning and successfully pushed for legislative changes that made it easier for law enforcement to investigate suspected cases of slow-acting toxins. Grace Nakamura, the investigator who had uncovered Victoria's true identity, went on to write a book about the case, a detailed account of how the fraud was constructed and dismantled. She donated her royalties to a foundation supporting survivors of financial abuse. I dated occasionally in the years following the trial, but carefully and without the desperate loneliness that had made me vulnerable to Victoria. I'd learned that I could be happy alone, that filling the void of grief with another person was a risk that had to be weighed against the possibility of another catastrophic mistake. Eventually, I found someone, a woman named Catherine, a professor of environmental science at the University of Colorado, who I met at a conference on sustainable building design. She was nothing like Victoria, nothing like Sarah, her own person entirely, with no interest in playing a role or manipulating my emotions. Our relationship developed slowly, over years rather than months, built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. We were married 5 years after the trial, in a small ceremony attended by family and close friends. Daniel and Lily stood beside me. Raymond gave a toast that made everyone laugh and then cry. Catherine's daughter from her first marriage read a poem about second chances. I was 62 years old. I had survived an assassination attempt disguised as love, and I had found a genuine partnership built on truth instead of manipulation. The structure was finally sound. People ask me sometimes what I learned from the experience. They want a tidy moral, a lesson they can apply to their own lives to protect themselves from similar betrayal. I wish I had one. The truth is more complicated. I learned that trust is essential, but verification is wisdom. I had trusted Victoria because I wanted to trust her, because grief had left a hole in my heart that I was desperate to fill, and she presented herself as the perfect solution. I didn't verify because verification felt like betrayal, like admitting that my judgment might be flawed. But my judgment was flawed. Everyone's judgment is flawed. That's not weakness. It's humanity. The answer isn't to trust no one, but to build relationships on foundations that can withstand inspection. A genuine partner doesn't resent verification. They welcome it because they have nothing to hide. I learned that evil doesn't always look evil. Victoria wasn't a cartoon villain cackling over her schemes. She was warm, attentive, thoughtful. She remembered birthdays, asked about my work, cared for me when I was sick. She performed love so convincingly that I never questioned whether the performance was real. The most dangerous predators are the ones who look like prey. They exploit our instinct to trust, our need for connection, our fear of being alone. They study their targets with the patience of architects and construct facades that seem structurally sound until the moment everything collapses. I learned that recovery is possible, but permanent is a myth. I will never be the person I was before I met Victoria. The experience changed me, made me more cautious, more observant, less willing to accept things at face value. Some of those changes are protective. Others are scars that will never fully heal. But change isn't destruction. The building stands, even if it's been renovated. The foundation holds, even if it needed reinforcement. I'm not the same man who walked into that charity gala and fell for a beautiful woman with green eyes and a story about art. That man was naive in ways I can never be again. The man I am now is different, not broken, different. And there's a version of wholeness in accepting that difference rather than trying to return to who I used to be. I learned that institutions matter. Without Raymond's vigilance, I would be dead. Without Dr. Okonkwo's expertise, my poisoning would never have been confirmed. Without Detective Santos's dedication, Victoria and Derek might have plea-bargained their way to minimal sentences. Without Grace Nakamura's investigative skills, the full scope of the conspiracy would have remained hidden. I survived because I had access to resources, legal, medical, financial, that many victims don't have. I was lucky. Others in similar situations haven't been. That's why I've spent a portion of my recovered assets establishing a foundation that provides legal and investigative support to suspected victims of domestic, financial, and medical abuse. The Teresa Whitmore Foundation, named for Derek's first wife, whose murder went unsolved for too long, has helped identify and prosecute over a dozen cases similar to mine in its first 3 years of operation. Justice shouldn't depend on having a rich friend who's willing to hire private investigators. It should be accessible to everyone. Finally, I learned that survival isn't just physical. My body was poisoned, but so was my sense of reality. Victoria didn't just try to kill me. She tried to convince me that her version of our life was true, that my suspicions were paranoia, that her love was genuine. Fighting that kind of manipulation requires more than medical treatment. It requires rebuilding your relationship with truth itself, learning to trust your own perceptions again after someone spent years convincing you they were wrong. That process took longer than the chelation therapy. In some ways, it's still ongoing. But every day that I wake up clear-headed, every decision I make based on evidence rather than wishful thinking, every moment of genuine connection with people who don't have hidden agendas, those are victories over the person who tried to destroy me. It's been 7 years since Raymond called me on a Sunday morning and told me not to eat my wife's cooking. I'm 54 years old now. I live in a house I designed myself, with a wife I trust completely, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends who have proven their loyalty through action rather than words. Victoria is in prison, where she will remain for at least another 23 years. Reports from the corrections system indicate she's a model prisoner, charming and cooperative, already working to position herself for eventual parole. I have no doubt she'll try again when she gets out. Different name, different target. Same fundamental predation. I've made arrangements to be notified if she's ever released. And I've made sure the story of what she did remains part of the public record, so that her future victims might have a chance to discover who they're dealing with before it's too late. Derek died in federal prison 4 years into his sentence. Heart attack, officially. Some people whispered that he'd made enemies inside, that his death wasn't as natural as the medical examiner claimed. I don't know the truth, and I've found that I don't particularly care. The man who was my partner for 15 years, who stood beside me at my wedding, who played with my children and helped build my company. That man tried to murder me for money. Whatever happened to him after that is not my concern. I think sometimes about the person I used to be, the trusting soul who believed that love was enough, that people who showed kindness must be kind, that the structures we build in our relationships are as solid as the buildings we design. I don't regret being that person. He was capable of joy and connection in ways that my more cautious self sometimes struggles to access. He believed in people, which is a beautiful thing even when it's dangerous. But I don't mourn him either. He had to change or die. He changed. That's not tragedy. That's adaptation. We build structures to last. We design foundations that can withstand the forces that seek to bring them down. We plan for contingencies, test for weaknesses, reinforce the points where failure is most likely. And when, despite all our care, something we built is damaged, by time, by disaster, by betrayal, we don't walk away. We assess the damage. We determine what can be saved. We rebuild with the knowledge we've gained. That's what I've done with my life. That's what anyone can do with theirs. The casserole was still warm that Sunday morning 7 years ago. If I'd eaten it, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. But I didn't eat it. And I am here. And that, in the end, is the only lesson that truly matters. We survive, we rebuild, we endure. Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to completely reassess what you thought you knew about your life? How did you rebuild your sense of trust? Share your story in the comments, not because I want engagement metrics, but because I know from experience that healing often begins when we realize we're not alone. If this story resonated with you, please share it. Not for my sake, but because someone in your life might be experiencing something similar and not know how to articulate it. The more we talk about these crimes, the slow betrayals disguised as love, the harder we make it for predators to operate in the shadows. We build things to last. We ensure the foundations hold. We never stop looking for the hidden flaw. That's the architect's duty. And now it's mine.